My parents are from South Korea, and I was born in Brazil, was a Brazilian citizen, and came to the US and grew up in Chicago. My mom and dad were born in the generation after the ceasefire of the Korean War in 1953, and they remember living in dirt roads, in shacks, in the capital city of Seoul. So my parents got a visitor's visa, and that was their way of migrating and traveling to the US. They immediately found a Korean community, a church community, and that's how that's a similar story of how immigrants assimilate into a new culture and country. My dad made sure that we knew how to read and write in Korean, and also learn Chinese characters because that's part of the Korean history. I definitely grew up knowing the Korean culture. They came with nothing, and so it was extremely important for us to succeed for them. There was a lot of stress and a lot of expectations. So when I was 7, my dad pulled our family together in the living room and told us that he had a secret to tell us. And he said, this is a very serious secret and we cannot tell anyone outside of the family. And he said that we were undocumented, and he explained what that meant, that there was a green card and a citizenship, and we had neither of those, and that we are not allowed to actually be living here. Being undocumented meant that we didn't have rights to collect what was rightfully ours, and that we just didn't have the right to have anything. There was no hope for me as far as going to college or doing other things that my friends were able to do. Since the age of 7, I grew up with the fear of family separation, never seeing my parents, my brother again, and that was a real fear that was engraved in us. see our parents very much. So I think obviously I still have kind of that absence of the relationship with my parents. Their struggles became part of mine and ours. In Korean, the way my parents, they never said I love you to us, not once. The way they said I love you is, did you eat? Did you do your homework? Are you taking care of yourself? That's how they say I love you. It's a very different way. It's a very different culture. I would say I'm a survivor of poverty, of growing up undocumented, a survivor of not having many resources and being able to succeed. I see myself as a person of the world. My parents are from Korea and I was born in Brazil and I grew up here in America. And that's something that I struggled with, my identity. Was I Korean? Was I Brazilian? Was I American? I don't know. I couldn't figure it out. And I came to a conclusion that actually I'm a person of the world and I'm a human being.
I was born in Tehuitzingo. It's a small city in the state of Puebla, and I was raised there with my grandparents until age 4. First, my dad came. I was 6 months when he came. He left me when I was 6 months old, and my brothers were like 2 and 3. He came looking for the American dream, right? I grew up here and my parents were very prideful, and since little they showed me the Mexican culture. But when I went back, it was kind of like, it was weird because you're like in between. You don't know where you belong. Toda mi enseñanza fue de bilingüe hasta que yo tenía unos 11 años y de ahí es que empecé a ir a clases regulares de inglés. I think you realize it when you're like a teen, not really when you're little. Once I knew my friends were able to drive and I couldn't do that, once I knew they were able to do certain things that I couldn't do that, you know, that's when it reaches you. That's when I understood what my parents had to go through. They had to hide their status because they would be in risk of something happening to them. Even my mom, I think she was sharing a story that she wasn't able to buy her clothes for her graduation, so she didn't even attend her graduation. So she never got her certificate, even though she already had graduated as a teacher. Like that, not even having money for that. And I think knowing that she had 3 children and what would be in Mexico, what salary or what money was she gonna make it to raise her 3 children, I think we were the reason they came here, so they could give us a better life. as a senior, I had a professor who was teaching us how to go and protest because they were taking funds from public schools. So I remember going and he being so proud of me. And then one day he comes and he's like, here, everybody has to register to vote, right? And he hands me a paper and I said, I can't. And he looks at me, he's like, what do you mean? And I was like, no, I can't. And I think he finally realized that I was undocumented. And I think just the look and the expression of him, it was very kind of like, it was in a way, like I could feel like he was like proud of me, but at that moment, it clashed between them. When I went back to Mexico, I went to find myself. That trip was basically to find myself and to come back to that child and say, Diana, you gotta get back to where you were supposed to be. So when I came back from Mexico, I started to do things that I never thought I would be possible of doing, right? Right now, I'm one of like the co-founders of a grassroots organization. I'm part of like 2 other organizations. I got a scholarship to go back to school from a foundation because they saw my leadership. And it's like I was able to get a job that I probably never would have thought I would have gotten it, that has benefits. I never knew what benefits were until I got the job, right? And back then it was like a stereotype that the dreamers had to be like students, that dreamers had to be like super smart, that dreamers had to be like the highest of like basically the best, the elite of the whole undocumented community. Now obviously as an activist that I am, I understand that that was harmful for the rest of the undocumented community, right? And the rest are my parents, the rest are my brothers, the rest are my cousins, my uncles and everything. That happens a lot in my community, that the parents don't show their emotions or don't tell you, like if they want to teach you a lesson, like if you're doing something wrong, they'll just tell you it's wrong, but they won't really explain to you why it's wrong. I learned from their mistakes, so I try to not do the same mistakes, but I also learn their abilities and basically their skills that they gave me. And for instance, I wouldn't know both languages if it wasn't for them, right? I wouldn't know what it is to like organize or how to lead a community if it wasn't for them. For my undocumented community, my hopes is honestly to empower them, right? To give them tools, to let them know that they could succeed, that not just in work, but they can learn things, right? Many of our undocumented, especially our parents, their stories have never been heard. We usually hear the stories from the young ones, the dreamers, but our parents, their stories, I think, are so impactful that if they were to start sharing them, maybe people would realize, right, that they're not like the people who are being criminalized. We got promised so many times that things were gonna happen, and it never did. And now that we're at this point, it angers me even more with the people who didn't do anything, right? Like, people don't act unless it happens to them. So my message is to the dreamers is like, not just to focus on themselves and not just to give credit to themselves. You have to do something for the rest of the community. Just like our parents gave up their lives to bring us here, and just like the rest of the community is suffering for like being put down, for being basically targeted as that they were the criminals, it's time for us to step up.
My mother grew up in Dubai and my father grew up in Egypt. My father came here first on a visa, and me and my mother came a year after on a temporary visa. What happens is my parents overstayed both of their visas. I remember that when I got off the plane, I did not recognize my father because I was 3 years old and it had been a year since I'd seen him. When I grew up in Dubai, like, the first language I ever learned was Somalian by a babysitter. And then I learned Arabic. And so by the time I was 3 years old, I knew 3 different languages. Now I consider English my first language. I still speak Arabic, however, I'm illiterate when it comes to reading and writing. It was very, very important to them to make sure that we knew it because it's part of who we are and where we came from, you know? On one hand, I was this girl who was just going to public school, trying to fit in because I went to a very emotionally difficult school to go to, and so I was trying to go through that as like a young American just trying to fit in the way my parents were trying to fit in. And at the same time, I was still trying to hold on to the heritage and the culture and the language and the music. Post 9/11 was probably the hardest thing ever because no one assumed that a year after us just getting the family back together and trying to start this American dream that things would just go downhill so fast. I was expected to grow up into this young Muslim woman to represent a heritage and culture that I did not feel like I could confidently represent with the kind of stigma and propaganda that was just everywhere. I did not find out I was a dreamer until I was a senior in high school. And once I realized that even private universities couldn't give me their private kind of aid because of the label of immigrant that I am, and that's a kind of disadvantage that not anyone else has, it just shattered like all future hopes. sustain living on their own in a city where they say opportunity is granted for everyone, but it doesn't actually feel that way. At this point, I consider myself an American. And I just wish that legally I was seen that way too. My dad always wanted to go back home, and my mom was just trying to make the best of the situation that she was given. You know, I don't think either of them expected it to be as hard as it was when they got here. Coming here was the only choice that they had, because had I been growing up in Egypt, I would have been sheltered to the point where I would have never even gotten an education to begin with. Growing up was constantly being told that everything was wrong. My parents were very homophobic, very racist, very stereotypical, just growing up in a completely different time period. And they wanted me to be two completely different people. You know, my mom raised me to be a very independent, strong woman, but at the same time, they were both very overprotective in a sense, where it was very sheltered, ignorant, gullible. When I left home, I had only a picture of my work permit, I had a picture of my social, and I had never had a job or a bank account, and my parents were restricting me from continuing my education, and so I felt like I had to leave. I am better off mentally and emotionally and physically. Everyone chooses whoever they want to be, you know? New York is very much this place where you can be the person you choose to be. At this point, everyone in my family, at least, is waiting to find a path to citizenship. I wish I had known that dreamers don't have a path to citizenship. All we can do is try to build support systems and try to keep raising awareness so that politicians and people of power can notice the issues at hand and make a change.
I turned 8 on the plane, and when I came to America, it was kind of like a dream. My mom came to do her master's at UMass Lowell, and she got hired by a church to direct the worship group. And she loved America, but the truth is that she was trying to get away from my dad. I don't know when I realized that I was leaving my country forever, because I still don't know if I have. I still speak to my mom in Portuguese. I speak to my little brother and sister in Portuguese, my grandma in Portuguese. Speaking Portuguese outside of our home was terrifying. It was embarrassing. It was scary. My parents never explicitly told me, you're undocumented. But hearing it in church and hearing what I could and couldn't do, being told what I could and couldn't say, I connected the dots. And I didn't know what it really meant until around high school, when all my friends were getting driver's licenses and I couldn't. That's when my resentment towards the government, towards the country began. It didn't start spewing over into the people, the American people, until recently. When I found out, oh wait, I am the other, I am different, I'm not like everybody else. It's painful, it's hurtful, but that kind of solidified my idea of my place in the United States. I became more afraid of being discovered or being jailed. I feel uncomfortable in certain places. I feel like I don't have a voice and I can't say what I want to say. I have no rights, or fewer than I deserve. I feel like I've gotten more adamant about achieving my goals, to prove something to the world. It hasn't emotionally kept me back. Legally, absolutely, at every turn. I have never blamed my parents or felt any resentment towards them for bringing me here. I am grateful to them because I love this country. I love the opportunities that I've been given by being here, and I appreciate that they put everything on the line to give me a better life. At every moment that a new yield sign was put up, my parents were there to help me push forward. Unfortunately, my dad had to go back to Brazil when I was around 16 or 17 because he was losing his family. My grandma died, his mom, my aunt died, his sister, and his dad is very old. He got divorced from my mom, and since his whole family was still there, he decided to go back. The way that being undocumented affected my relationship with my dad is because I still can understand why he had to make that choice. It's not a fair choice. I haven't seen him in 6 or 7 years. My dreams for the immigrant is that Congress will pass a law that will give us a pathway to citizenship so I can be a part of the country, so I can become part and not the other. But it's still scary to live openly as a DACA recipient because I don't know if something will change one day and they'll target me. I have no hopes for undocumented immigrants at the moment. There are lots of people that profit from illegal immigrants and illegal immigration. It's an easy way for people in power to keep the attention of their constituents, to keep them by their side, to have an enemy. There's only one thing that anybody can do, which is vote. Because this is your country, and you really do have the power to shape it. It's easier not to do anything.
I am a lawyer by training, but I am currently the first dreamer to ever run for office in the state of New York. I came from Colombia when I was 9 years old with my mother. We left Colombia because we were escaping drug wars and violence, and we came to Queens as undocumented immigrants and made Queens our home. I knew that we weren't planning on coming back. I knew that it was probably going to be a very long time before I saw any of my family. And as a matter of fact, approximately 15 years passed before I could see any of them again. And it's been one of the toughest things. I didn't get to meet my sister and my brother until they were adults already. It was not being able to bury my grandmother when she passed away, not being able to bury my other grandfather when he passed away. Not being able to celebrate weddings and christenings for cousins and uncles that I love because we were here in the United States. As a child, it was just an automatic thing. You knew with mommy, you speak Spanish. With my dad, I would speak Spanish. With the family, I would speak Spanish. And at home with my sisters, we'd speak Spanglish. And in the street with friends and other folks, I'd speak English. So I show more emotion. I am able to be more comfortable when I am communicating in Spanish. I even prefer reading in Spanish. You give me a book in Spanish and I'll devour the book in a couple of days. When it comes to English, it's just, it's normal, but there's no emotion attached to that part of language in my brain. The communication at home had always been, you don't do anything to get caught. You don't cause trouble in school, you don't get arrested, you don't jump turnstiles, you just don't do anything. You fly under the radar, and you don't talk about it outside of the home. There was no hanging out, there was nothing that I was doing anywhere else because I was too afraid to do anything, to live the life that a usual teenager would live, or even, there's teens you get in slight bits of trouble once in a while. The legal and emotional impact of not having that piece of paper. The first time was when I started applying to college. The second time, it was more of an emotional time. It was when my grandmother, my mother's mother, passed away, and we couldn't go bury her. We couldn't say goodbye. We just had to, my mother and I, suffer the pain and the process here on our own. It was the suffering and the struggles and enduring the discrimination and being told you don't belong here. Had I been privileged enough to have been born in this country or have had status, I probably wouldn't have been fighting as hard as I am. How far I've come? We have a woman who comes to our office once in a while with her daughter to collect cans, and every time I see them, it's like seeing my mother and I when I was that age, when I was 9 years old, collecting cans with my mom. But I'm also very ashamed. And I'm very ashamed because I feel a sense of guilt, because getting status, getting success should not be just for feelings. It's a little bit more than just survivor's guilt. I left my entire family. Some of them has had to struggle a lot to attain even a little bit of success. Colombia, just like me. She came here with her mom at 9 years old, and a month ago her mother was deported. And I still get to have my mom with me. I feel very guilty about that. He was so smart. My father was a former union organizer. For years, he was a community leader, loved by everyone. That love for the system, for working through it, for helping our community in that political way. She's like, that's all from your father. That election night, when all I could do was cry because I felt helpless to help my goddaughter, that I made the decision I had to do more. I couldn't just sit there. I couldn't just not tell my story. Making that decision and filing that paperwork and doing it without him has been one of the most painful things I've had to do as an adult. I remember when I graduated high school and I was in the process of going to school and I didn't know how I was going to go to CUNY because I had already decided that's where I was going to go. I didn't get financial aid. I had to pay for all of it and I didn't know how I was going to do it. And my mom surprised me. She had been saving a whole year. She had been saving a whole year and paid for my entire first year so I could go to CUNY. And when I decided to run for office, she said to me, we didn't work as hard as we did for you to decide to be mediocre. We're gonna do this. They need to recognize that they're immigrants themselves, that they come from immigrants, and unless they're Native American, they came from somewhere else. It's a little bit of fear of the unknown, of this other, of someone who is not perceived as they're not like me, they weren't born here. The reason why most immigrants are fleeing their country is because at some point, probably the United States or another country put their hands into the politics of that country, messed with it, changed the political climate, the economy, and people are dying, people are poor, people are fleeing violence that was created by colonialism by the United States, often in Latin America. And now we want to turn around and close off our doors, not understanding that we've created a lot of this problem. My biggest two hopes are that we are able to keep our families together and that we can treat our immigrants, and especially our undocumented immigrants, with dignity.
I am originally from Peru. I came to the United States when I was 9 years old. My mom's side of the family was already here. They had already migrated in the 80s and early 90s. And then also my parents just wanted more an economic opportunity, and also they saw that there wasn't really much for us in Peru at the moment. The day that I came, when I was at the airport, I remember I was told not to cry. Because I was supposed to come to the United States as a tourist, so why would you cry, right? You're supposed to come back to Peru. So I was told by my mom not to cry. So it was very difficult to see like my dad saying goodbye and not being able to shed a tear. The visa just ran out of its own course, so I think it was like a 5 and 10 year visa, so we just ran its course and we just became undocumented after that. And I realized at a very young age that I wasn't documented because my family, especially my aunt, she would like joke a lot like about back like La Migra, immigration and stuff like that. And during those years, it was very much like you don't come out as undocumented, you stay in the shadows because you don't want any problems. And then we also had conversations where what would happen or what would I do if one day my parents didn't come home from work. It took me a very long time to tell my best friends that I was undocumented, but I would talk about like issues that plagued the undocumented community a lot. And then when I finally did, which was in 2012 actually, that I told them, they were like, oh, there's nothing wrong with being undocumented. Being undocumented has just made me empathize with people, make me have a stronger voice, and connect with other people that have the same challenges and experiences I have, and then it has also made me become an activist in this particular theme. And I have also influenced other people, like my friends, to also raise their voice and stop being so apolitical, because a lot of them have the privilege to be apolitical. My parents have helped my identity because they really show me what hard work is. Like my mom, she would wake up at 5 in the morning to cook for factories for lunches, and then have a little break, and then at 5 p.m. we'll cook again for the factories at 8 p.m. And she had a job in between that. You need to push yourself to be just as great as them, because you have to work twice as hard because you don't have papers. So if you want to go to college, there are sacrifices that have to be made. Okay, you need to be grateful for what you have. You can't complain, and you can never guilt or accuse your parents or of anything just because they wanted to bring you here. Your identity is just based on their hard work, and you need to just make sure that you're thankful for everything that they've done. Wanting to better yourself or better the life of your kids or your family is not a crime. The stereotype, especially for young Latinas, which is like, you get pregnant at a very young age, or like you don't have a stable home. And I think for us was like, okay, you need to shatter these stereotypes, one, and then two, like how are you going to show yourself to the world? What I want to see for the whole undocumented community is for them to have a road to become documented. There were still deportations happening under the Obama administration. Sometimes I feel like immigrants are being just used as pawns for other political gains. Like 5 to 10 years from now, like Spanish will be the #1 spoken language in the United States. I don't think diversity should be something scary. I think diversity should be uplifted and celebrated. Just treat each other like human beings, have empathy, and stop seeing yourself as us versus them, because that is just nonsense. It's just, at the end of the day, it's just borders. It's just lines on the ground. People's natural right is to migrate. Like, we are not like stationary people. It is our right to migrate.
Colombia is a very Interesting, beautiful country with one of the longest ongoing civil wars in the world. So my family history is very much nestled into that. That history of like the conflict being in the background and us being part of the conflict is something that was felt by my family, and it kind of left a strong imprint in all of us. You don't really want to have your kids starve, so you do whatever you can to provide a better living for them, even if that means you not being in the picture. My mom, I had not seen her in 2 years, so it was an incredibly emotional moment. I met my dad for the first time, and that was the first day that my family was officially born as a full new family in this country. I realized what it was to have a family in this country, even though it was this country that took away my family. There's something very interesting that happened to me when I started to learn English, was that a certain part of my Spanish started to die off. The richness in the language that I had when I was growing up, it's very much a Spanish from 2000. All of these expressions, the mannerisms, it's like a time capsule from when I was growing up. And the structure that I acquired is from that period of time. And that's kind of what we kept with my family. And at home, what ended up happening is none of my parents spoke English. So I had to always stay with Spanish. So there was always this kind of like very different spheres of how we speak and how we relate. English became my dominant language, and then Spanish became the language in the background. My Spanish is the representation of my nature, of where I come from, of my roots. And then overlaid on that is this English that's very formal, rounded, inquisitive, broad, deeply kind of like philosophical, like a little bit more formal. So I was always aware of the status that I had, but it didn't have consequences. Up until when I started to go for my first job, or when I wanted to apply to college. There was always this idea that there are certain things that I couldn't do, like travel. And that became very clear to me when my grandmother passed away. The day that she passed away, seeing the expression on my mother, and then knowing that pain that she was going through there, because you could see it. And it was the pain of somebody not being able to mourn or be next to a body. That was the first time that I really felt like, oh shit, my God, me maduré dice, which basically means I had to become very knowledgeable, very resourceful at a very young age. So in 2011, my mom and our immigration application got denied. And you get this letter in the mail that says to you, you have 90 days to leave the country or face removal procedures. My family made a choice. My mom moved back to Colombia, and then my father, doing his best, we changed everything. So for about 1.5 years until DACA came out, I was under the radar. I would say that that was the greatest pain I ever lived. To know that my mom left and I could never see her until I could travel. So it's been 7 years. I call it her exile. Your life is basically built on thin air. This current iteration that I'm in, my life is built 2 years at a time, one renewal at a moment. The density of one lifespan has already happened to me in the last couple of years. All of the shit that comes at you that makes you feel like you're not worthy, that you don't belong, that you're this illegal alien, that your life has to be justified all the time, that is something outside of your control. And there's a lot of people that don't have that capacity to piece these things through, and it really kills them inside. One of my most difficult things is with my sexuality and Spanish. Because Spanish is an incredibly sexist language, and I myself identify as genderqueer. Soy un hombre vestido de mujer, which is basically saying I'm a man dressed as a woman, like when I do something that's more gender fluid. Instead of, in English, there is this idea of I'm not gendered, so I'm just a person that's wearing, more gender fluid clothing. Society will always shape language. Language is fluid, language is transformative. Language has this beautiful power to convey so many things. I feel like a lot of times language is used to ossify some cultural norms. And then there's this idea that these norms have to be kept up. There is this whitewashing of the American experience, of all of its conflicts and all of its issues. And there is this glorifying of this white American identity. And if you don't fit in that space, then they're trying to push you out. No human being is illegal. To regulate a human life is to objectify it. To objectify a human life is to minimize it. My hopes are that we come into a society where everybody is acknowledged for what they contribute, and that a piece of paper does not have to validate their existence. And, mixed status is a thing. Today I could be sin papeles, and then tomorrow I could be con papeles. I'm still Hector. It's important that we stand with each other and keep uplifting our voices and not to minimize the experiences of others. There's so much pain in our society, and a lot of conflict comes because we haven't dealt with these pains. And a lot of times these internal demons manifest in the minimizing of others. That's also why engaging with people in an actual rich conversation really makes a difference, because we are all individuals in terms of how we live our life, but yet we all share a life.
I was born in Puebla, Mexico. My dad came to New Jersey to be with his brothers and to work here. After about 2 years, he told my mom, like, listen, here we have to work hard, but if you work hard, you make good money. So my mom left when I was about 1 year old. And then when I was 3 years old, I crossed the border with someone they knew, and then my dad went to California to pick me up. My grandfather was gonna cross with me, but he was caught twice, and it became really dangerous because he was old, and so the heat and everything. So I remember him hugging me and then walking away, and then me leaving. The first really clear memory I have is meeting my mom, because we were walking down the street, and I just heard like this lady scream and run towards me and hug me, and she was like crying, and I was like, who is this? I didn't know who she was, even after like looking at her, like I didn't know who she was, and I was scared. I was really, really embarrassed about my accent. So I was actually like selectively mute, basically. Like I would not speak in class because I didn't want them to hear me speak English. My Spanish is really, really bad. To the point where sometimes my mom will be talking to me and I'll like black out because I just don't know what she's saying. It's those moments where you realize like we really grew up in different ways, and you get frustrated at yourself mainly because why didn't I bother to keep speaking Spanish? And it's because you were trying so hard to assimilate to America that you just forgot it. I've gone from being embarrassed about my English to being embarrassed about my Spanish. So it's like what they say, like you always have to prove to Americans that you're American enough, and then you have to prove to Mexicans that you're Mexican enough. We had an ice raid at the apartment building. I lived in Plainfield, and my babysitter, her younger sister was like, oh, like when ice comes, you have to hide. And I was like, why? And she was like, oh, they're here to take you. And she was essentially the first person that told me I was undocumented. Your life when you're a kid, it's just all about your parents staying with you. I remember kids were coming home and their parents weren't there, and they would have to sleep on their cafeteria, like their school cafeteria floor. I remember watching that, and that's when I kind of realized that like there's a danger every day when I walk home from school, even though my parents aren't criminals, even though they're just here to work. About 3 years ago, there was a huge car accident in my family, and my mother lost her father, her uncle, and her nephew. Yeah, I remember her at night telling me, find a plane ticket, I don't care, I'm leaving, I want to say goodbye to him. And that's when we realized that what they sacrifice sometimes is a lot more than just working. You know, watching my parents work hard, I work hard, and they always told me, we have like 3 jobs so that your one job can be to study. So I was really good in school, and I would get these offers to go travel to Italy and to go study in Spain. And then I would go to my mom really excited, we can do this, we're gonna give you a scholarship or whatever. And you know, watching my mom be like, you can't do that because if they put you on a plane to leave, you can't come back. So that's sort of when I realized like there's gonna be a lot that I miss out on. There's gonna be a lot of opportunities that I deserve and that I won't be able to take. My parents are really hard workers, and I think most people from immigrant families can relate to that. Like if your parents working for $5 an hour and they're working 3 jobs because they don't know that they have rights that protect them from stuff like that. When DACA was rescinded, the first thing I felt wasn't anger or sadness or fear. The first thing I felt was hurt, because I've worked hard in this country. You know, I've worked jobs too. I've been a nanny and a teacher and gone to clean housing with my mom all at the same time while being a full-time student. I've never committed a crime. I've lived as much of a clean, right, American that I can, and now we have a president that doesn't see me as someone that's deserving of the right to work or drive or go to school. When DACA was rescinded on September 5th, my mom called me and she was like, Cielo, I'm sorry. Like, I'm so sorry that this is my fault and that I didn't know that it would be like this when we came. And that was the first time that I was really, really angry because she doesn't deserve to feel like that. I think it definitely escalated when Trump decided to run. And you hear things like they should go back to their country. People expect that when hate comes your way, you become silenced. And if anything, it helped me become louder. If you attack DACA kids, you're attacking me. If you're attacking undocumented families, you're attacking my family. In my mind, they're as deserving as DACA recipients because they were the ones that made the decision, I want what's best for my family. And I'm willing to put my life at risk in order to give my child what they deserve. So, having their support and having their love and having them be such examples for me is something that's really special to me. You're not only crossing those cultural barriers, now you're trying to cross those legal barriers too. We need people on the other side to understand that we're people too. And a lot of that comes from allies. We don't have undocumented people being shown or being represented. Educate and show up and vote, vote and keep dreamers in mind when you vote.
I am from Portugal, up north, where we're the craziest ones. My mom's family was one of 6, she's one of 6 girls. My dad is one of 8, boys and girls. So they're not very rich. Things got a little tough for my dad, his business, the marriage, and he moved here. I don't think my parents really knew the magnitude of that decision. So it really fucking sucked. Just because you don't know how to say computer in a different language doesn't mean you don't know what a computer is. And just because you have to then point at it instead of saying the word, people will automatically think you know less, or almost like you're less of a human being. I was put into like this English as a second language class where everybody was like Hispanic. But I ended up picking up English faster than all of them because they had a community to speak their language with. I didn't. And then my senior year in high school, my counselor, I couldn't quite understand what she was pushing for, but now I do, because I look back, I think about it. She wanted me to pick a college to go to so she could help me through the application process. And this was 3 years after I got here. So not only am I trying to learn these ins and outs, I'm also still trying to learn the language. I started to realize that this school I was going to allowed me to go even without this special number that everybody talks about. So that's it. I focused on school. I studied. It was the only thing I cared about. My friends were all like, well, I didn't want to hang out with my friends because I realized that was not important. I mean, I couldn't do a bunch of stuff, and so it would become really hard for people to understand unless I told them why. I always looked at the idea of being illegal as shameful. It's much easier to express exactly what I want to say in English than in Portuguese. Because in Portuguese, I have a whole repertoire of words. Whereas in English, this is what I got. There's definitely like a bit of a difference. When I try to speak to a friend from Portugal, that their Portuguese evolved. There's a word in Portuguese that does not exist, at least in English. And it's saudade. To miss something can be said in English. You know, eu sinto falta de alguma coisa, I miss you. But there isn't a word, there isn't a noun to describe the verb. So the difference to me between a citizen and somebody in my situation is that we can't mess up. I'm in this situation, I didn't put myself in, and now I have to deal with it. And so there's this, there's a little bit of anger. There's like this uneasy feeling that you never belong. maybe like the last week of school. By then I had a car and I drove to school. I was like, look at me, what everybody's been doing for years on end, you know? But you know, it was so good to taste it. It was like you could just savor it, you know? Because I had to wait so long to have these things that maybe are taken for granted by people that are from here. I was, for many years, I was angry at my parents. Every time I felt like things were really hard here, I blame my parents, specifically my dad. He was the one that had his business go bankrupt. Eu estava revoltada e não sabia como lidar with those feelings, right? I kind of knew that for me to get out of the hole, like I could scream inside the hole and say, I don't want to be in this hole, but I knew that I had to build a ladder out of there. And so you want your life to go well because you want your kids' life to go well. And you might even sacrifice yours in a way so that you can push them farther out into a better situation, a better world. And I would do that. And I think that's what my parents did for us. I just couldn't see it at the time. I hope we can keep the scars, but just grow out of it. Grow out of like that uncomfortable, not fitting in feeling. Because they belonged all along. This is where they lived, this is where they grew up. And understand why people want to come here. And then take the time to focus on the good that comes from these immigrants. So why are they so uncomfortable with us wanting to be here? I mean, that's what everybody's always been doing. Nobody goes through moments like that of extreme challenge if they can pick an easier road. It opens our eyes to compassion, acceptance, and just possibility.